I'm here as a fill-in. I'm a ring-in. So I hope you don't mind. It's not on me. Maddie threw me in at the last hour. So you were coming here to listen to Bruce, and so instead you've got Stuart. So you'll have to make the best of it. I'll do the best I can. So I'm here to talk about natural sequence farming. How many people have heard of natural sequence farming in the room? A few people. I know there's some familiar faces in here. Most times I don't remember people's names, so don't feel, left out if I don't know your name, because I see faces but names disappear. Anyway, so natural sequence farming began with Peter Andrews at Tarwin Park in the Bylong Valley. Peter Andrews I refer to as PA, so if you hear me talking about PA, it's Peter Andrews, not PA Yeomans, which is interesting. You've got two water guys, both referred to as PA. So there's something in that, isn't there? Anyway, so PA started his experimentation work when he was at Broken Hill on a station out there. He then moved to South Australia, where he really started his trial work over there by himself. And then he purchased Tarwin Park in 1974. Tarwin Park was in a fairly ordinary state at the time, and so he either had a choice of fixing it or continue the degradation. So he made a choice of fixing, and from there that became his laboratory to work out how landscapes functioned. And so he worked there for, 20 odd years, whatever it was, and I was there right beside him for the whole time. Some of it was fairly torturous, I'd have to say, but nevertheless, anyone who's met PA will know he's a very strong personality, and only the tough survive. So I'm guessing that I must be reasonably tough, because I survived. But he is his ability out in the landscape is unbelievable. His ability to talk to people may be slightly different, but his ability in the landscape is unquestionable. And so I grew up learning beside him, or trying to learn, I should say. And really it wasn't until I started running Tarwin Park myself that I really understood what the hell it was he was talking about. And that's the same for anybody who comes and attends our courses. Unless you actually put something into practice, you learn nothing. You can go and sit and listen to me waffle on any time like today, but until you go and put something into place, you really don't learn anything. That's where your journey starts, is when you do something. Anyway, so it's through my inability to understand what the heck he was saying and watching that other people were just the same as me. I wasn't unusual. So we developed our training course. And our training course is there to disseminate his information in what he could see in the landscape to you, in a way that hopefully you can understand, which I think we do reasonably well. So the training course started in 2012. We've trained about 1,400 people now, have been through that course in that period of time. And we've got a lot of stuff happening out in the landscape today, which is really good, really impressive to see. And so our vision is to educate landholders about natural sequence farming, and we wish to create a hydrated, more productive and healthier landscape. That's him. Just in case you'd forgotten what he looked like. Always want to make sure. And I look for the faces just to see if anyone jumps out in shock when they see him there. But he is certainly a legend out there, and he should always be acknowledged. And so I'm always making sure that I acknowledge him. Now, I want him, because he's not here today, to talk to you about the landscape. So we'll have this little video. Can you hear that?
There is a plan in this landscape that shows us at any scale that can be achieved. The sky's the limit. My name is Peter Andrews. I've been involved in identifying how this landscape has worked for pretty well all my life. And I can guarantee today that the Australian land managers could lead the world if we understood what this landscape has to offer. I'm convinced that that's the case. I've gone around and built as many examples as I possibly can. So we're talking absolutely the blueprint this landscape contains. Australia is the comeback king from desertification. It's the oldest, the flattest, and has the least amount of natural water system. It doesn't have a lake in the centre or anything like that. And so everything about it would suggest that it should have been a desert, and of course it was. But the plants showed how it could be recovered, and we had megafauna on this land with no real beneficial climate backup. And so there is a story written in the landscape, no question. We've drained 94% of our wetlands. Then when we conduct agriculture, we create deserts of land, large areas of land. So it's necessary we do something to at least get that function back. The Australian wetlands always had water slowly moving, and it was described as a stepped diffusion system of broadacre hydroponics by a very good scientist. Fundamentally, it's managing water, filtering the losses that would normally occur, and returning them to the high point so that gravity and the sun can manage it all again. And one of the models we have shows that agriculture can be a fully functioning wetland if you design it correctly and follow the rules we've just been talking about. Reading the landscape is not much different than reading a book. You have to know the language, and then of course it's quite easy in my opinion, but I believe it is so critically important that we identify what this landscape can tell us and teach people how they can take advantage of those bits of information. For those good souls, well-meaning, desperately trying to do something with the climate, what we've got now is the evidence of how it was, the evidence of what's gone wrong, and in many cases, the solutions.
Credit to Peter Dowson up the back there. It's one of his little videos. Really well put together. Now, I hope you listen carefully to what PA talked about there, because I think sometimes it's a misunderstanding where they think that natural sequence farming is a human-induced idea, where it's not. It's landscape-based. The landscape is telling him and me what it needs. And you have to ask the questions of the landscape, not of a person. And that's the really important part, that everything we need to know, like we've spoken about earlier today, everything is out there in the landscape. You just have to have the right eyes to know what to look for, and all the answers will turn up for you. I'm going to go through these questions now because I've got like a very limited time. This is like a 50-minute presentation that Maddie's given me 40 minutes to present in. So Megan said don't waffle on too long, and I think I've already waffled on too long, but that's what happens. What are the two free energies that run your farm or run a landscape? I'm going to go through you. Just have a quick little attempt at answering it in your own head or to the person beside you, and I'll go through and give the answers. So it's sunlight and gravity. So you think about what sort of landscape is out there where sunlight and gravity are not well managed. What would you call that landscape? It has a name. You can say, PA said it, a desert. And a desert, in your mind, is where you head it right out to the western area where it hardly ever rains. But what we see as a desert is most of our farmland. Most of our farmland at certain times is actually a desert. If it's got no green growing plants, then it is performing the same role as a desert. So maintaining green plants. So how do you assess your basic farm productivity? How much green surface area you have. So that's the difference between a desert and not. How much green surface area have you got? What's the purest and most readily available water for plants on your farm? Dew, mist, fog. It's all referred to as a small water cycle. So how many of you wake up every day thinking, how well is my small water cycle working? Most of you? Probably not. Most people don't think about it because it's inconsequential. They just expect it to happen. But why? How does it happen? What can you do to influence it? Where does the energy that powers cyclones, typhoons and tornadoes come from? It's the energy released from the latent heat of condensation when water changes state from a gas to a liquid. So what manages this? The previous question, how much green surface area have we got? If we don't have enough plants, we're not managing the energy from the sun every day. That energy still remains in the system, so it converts to a different form. And we see it in the form of these large storms. Anyone watch the most recent rain event come down through Queensland? Yeah. Do you know why that happened? Did you watch the cyclone that came down the east coast prior to that? Did you see how the cyclone sat pretty much right over the top of where I am? Why did it do that? It wasn't there just to give me a hard time, I can assure you of that. Some may think that, but it wasn't that. So what was it? If you had a look, there was a big high pressure system sitting over Australia, so a big pocket of hot air over the major parts. So what's happening in New South Wales and Victoria? A lot of dry land, a lot of heat. Heat, energy coming from the sun, not being utilised by green plants, therefore it creates a big hot pocket. So the warm, moist air, which would normally have moved inland, couldn't, because it was trapped by that big hot mass. So that cyclone comes in, cools that pocket, which allows the next system to move a little bit further in. But what happened? There's places out there in the western part of Queensland that have been doing our work. One place in particular has had 330 mils in a couple of days. Their annual rainfall is 380. So why did it happen? It happens because we change the whole landscape that we end up with these massive hot pockets, so much evaporation, we've got excess water in the atmosphere, it's not managed, so it falls all in one go. These are the things we're talking about. So how do you affect that on a single property level? You can't, but you can affect the small water cycle, and if enough of you do it, you can impact the large water cycle, which is that. So how do landscapes maintain their fertility balance? By having edible and inedible plants. That's a key. If you have a plant in your system that you don't like, what would it be around here? I'm going to guess blackberries or something like that. St John's wort, yeah, there's always a couple of plants that people don't like. What was that? Fleabane, all of these things. These plants are just indicators as to what's going on in the landscape. Are they green and are they growing? The answer is yes. So are they ticking off all of the answers to the previous questions? Yes, they are. Every time you remove one, you removed that process. Yep. So dryland salinity, does salt rise against gravity or does it move laterally? Salt doesn't rise. It has to move laterally. So in Australia, are high water tables in farming systems beneficial to productive outcomes or detrimental? Depends how they're managed. So Tarwin Park, being majority floodplain, when PA did his work there, one thing he did was raise the aquifer level, which meant that a lot of the times it had a very high water table. But if you don't manage it, you know what it's like. The last couple of years, I guess, prior to this year, you would have had quite wet landscapes, wouldn't you? How many of you are actually wishing the rain went away? Be very careful what you wish for, because it will happen. And so how it's managed is the difference between a functioning and a dysfunctional landscape. Yep. Can you name the 5 basic functions of plants? They're solar-powered air conditioners, solar-powered moisture magnets, so they're powering the large water cycle, powering the small water cycle. They're solar-powered pumps, solar-powered soil carbon builders, solar-powered factories. If you think of every green plant as being that, then maybe you can take away your hatred for certain plants, because you realise that they are all carrying out a process. They're all trying to build and repair this landscape. So you have to look at, righto, what are they doing? Does that mean I want that plant growing? It doesn't necessarily mean that. It just means you have to ask the plant the question of what role is it playing. If you don't like it, you need another plant in there that will do the same job. Otherwise, you have to do it for them. Can you identify the natural landscape progression in all Earth's ecosystems? Everything moves from a high point to a low point. So if you think about wanting to help repair a landscape, where would you think to work? Or where would be the best place to work? You work at the top of the system, because everything you do up there will have an impact on everything below it. It's as simple as that. And that might be planting a tree on top of the hill, dropping a bale of hay or mulch or something on top of the hill, and then leave it at that. That could be as simple as it is. It's so easy for anyone to do this stuff. So natural sequence farming, what is it? So natural, working with nature. So looking at the landscape and asking the landscape, what does it require? That's the important part. Like PA, what did he say in that little video? He talked about reading the landscape. It's like reading a book. It is. But geez, it takes a long time to be able to read that book. It takes a long time to learn what you are trying to read. But if you start removing whatever else you've got in your head and start looking at the landscape and asking it, what's it going to tell you? Then you will learn very quickly. And that's part of what we do in our course, is to try and teach people to read the landscape, because that's the most important part. What you do is less important. It's being able to read the landscape and ask it what it requires. The sequence. So the sequence is a process started by a rain event. So in Australia, unlike Europe, it was driven by rain events. In Europe, you had snow and then a melt, so a freeze and a thaw, which was regular, happened every year, same time, all the time, which meant landscapes were able to build slowly. Hello? Gone flat already, Vatty.
Really? So it's got battery straight in.
Hello, 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 hello. That's right, I'll keep talking. Thankfully, I've got a voice that can boom over the top of anybody. Oh, anything. Thanks. No, no good. So it's a sequence started by a rain event. That's the difference between Europe and Australia. But of course, we came to Australia with a Europe mentality, not asking the landscape, not understanding anything about it. Oh, there you go. Well done. You just got to stand there and hold something, do you? Does anyone see how Maddie's hair stood on end when she stuck her finger between those 2 points? It's working well. So everything was driven by a rain event. And so Australia, if it's not set up, every time you get a rain event, if you don't start that process again, you missed it. So you've got to wait for the next rain event. How many people have been in a dry period and then it rains and nothing happens until the next rain event? How many people have seen that? It's time and time again, because your landscape is not in a condition and ability to receive the rain when it falls. So it's about how do we get our landscape in a position, in a condition, so that when it rains, bang, you can start that sequence. So what is the sequence? Rain event. What comes next? Plant growth. What sort of plants generally turn up after a dry period? Come on, you know what they're called. They start with W and end with S. You all hate them. Yeah, weeds, bloody things. But that's the sequence. It's critical that that is the sequence. That's how everything starts. Yeah, because it's a rebuild process. The landscape's trying to rebuild. So today, it's got to use whatever plants are available, because most of the ones that used to do that, we wiped out. So we've got to work with whatever plants we can. And farming is the overlaying of a farming system onto the landscape. Traditionally, I think what we do is we go to a landscape and we say, right, this place, I'm going to run cattle here. But you didn't ask the landscape, what was it capable of doing for you? And so we overlay a system onto a landscape that's incapable of handling it. If we go to the landscape with the view of saying to it, what are you able to do for me? What should I do? You ask those questions, then you overlay the correct farming system onto that landscape. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't get to, if you've got a dream of, say, running cattle at some stage, but the landscape's not capable of running cattle, it doesn't mean you can't get to there, but you're starting here and cattle is here. And so you can move your way into it. Yep? That's what natural sequence farming is. So we work on these 5 pillars, and they are slow the flow, let all plants grow, care for where the animals go, filtration's a must know, and return to the top to recycle the lot. Very, very simple. They're simple things. If you can tick off those 5 things in everything you do, then you're moving forward. How you go about it could be different for everybody. I can give you ways of going about it, but you might choose different ways. I don't care, as long as you're doing those 5 things. It's easy. So where to start? Managing water. Why do we need to manage water? Because the Australian landscape starts the sequence with a rain event. So if you're not managing water, you miss the first key component, because everything requires water. So maximising the green surface area, however you can do that. However you can do that, that's what you're aiming to do. Managing and moving fertility. Now, why is it we would want to manage and move fertility, do you think? Because everything moves from a high point to a low point. What happened prior to particularly white man coming to Australia? What used to happen? What do we have? What are those things with wings and feathers? Did they used to feed down in the lower ground, fly back up to the higher ground and poop, moving fertility? Yes, they did. Over thousands and thousands of years they did that. But what did we do? We chopped down the trees, bulldozed the trees, reduced the bird numbers. Now we haven't got the movement of fertility. So guess what? As a result of that, now you have to do it. That's the consequence of the management of the landscape in the last 200 odd years. So managing water. So nature once managed the flow of water, nutrients and matter over and through the landscape. That has been lost. So we want to look at how can we slow the water. By slowing the water, we reduce the losses of sediment, fertility and nutrients. Because remember, what is water? It's a taxi. What's the fuel? What's the fuel driving the taxi? Gravity. So now you've got a taxi carrying away all of your nutrients and all of your sediment if you allow it to. Every time it rains, that's what happens. So you're trying to manage the taxi and you're concentrating on the fuel. Yep. So the fuel that moves the water, there's the thing you need to work on. So it's an estimated 27 billion tonnes of fertile soil is lost yearly due to erosion. The thing is that what we see or don't see are the finest materials. Every time you see the water run, the river flow, and it flows with a colour in it, you are losing, or the landscape is losing. Your water should be filtered on your piece of land. You should not be losing anything. 1, you don't want to lose it because it affects your productivity, and 2, you're going to be polluting somebody else's water further downstream as a result. And these things are very easy to do. The landscape did it all by itself, had wetlands all over the place managing that. Didn't mean that erosion didn't take place, but it meant that the sediment or fertility only moved from here to there. Today, it falls here and finishes in South Australia. That's the difference. So 80% of all water and fertility is lost to gravity. That country where I was talking about, where they had 330 mils, the data out there on that country, it's west of 2 hours west of Charleville, a little place called Daugherty. That landscape out there, they say 90% of the water runs off. That's government figures. What are our government doing about reducing how much water flows off? Zero, nothing. So we know that the country is shedding water, but no one's doing anything about it. How crazy is that? So we look at the ways that nature managed water. Anyone seen these before? Anyone who's been to a presentation that I've done, they've probably seen this exact photo, because it's a bloody good one. It shows you everything. Everything you need to know about this landscape is right there in that picture. Even though it's only very small, that's all you need to know. What's going on? So you've got the water pooling. So the moment the water pools, what happens? Lost its energy, hasn't it? What does it do next, Lloyd? Goes in the ground. Yeah. So where the water stopped, has gravity been lost? No, it hasn't. So it's still got the fuel, but what's it doing now? Because the water stopped moving that way, it's now going that way. So now it's going in the ground. This Australian landscape held its water in the soil, not on top of it in big ponds. It was in the land. That's where it should be. But we don't look at that. We put big bloody dams up that evaporate 2 to 3 metres of water per year. Pretty illogical when you start to understand how this landscape works. So what's managing all of this? Plants and organic matter. Building these little contours, which is managing water. How many people have seen their lawn after they've mown it and a rain event's come through? You've seen all these little lines across your lawn. Did you think anything of it? Probably not. But that's nature trying to manage the water moving off of your lawn. That happens out across the landscape everywhere. The problem is that the way we conduct farming or agriculture prevents this from lasting. So, if that's what the landscape's telling us, that's what it's trying to do, what can we do? We can mimic that. So you manage water in the landscape, we implement contours, ponds and structures, which are just like, designed exactly the same as the one nature would build, except they're a little bit bigger. Yep. Why are they bigger? Because of us. Because of our animals. Because of our machines. Because of our cars, our motorbikes. All of these things we move around the landscape prevent nature's way of being able to do what it needs to do. If we all up and left, this landscape would be perfectly fine all by itself. It would figure out ways of how to manage it. But if I ask all of you to get up and move to Mars tomorrow, would you? Would you jump on Elon's spaceship and head to Mars? You probably wouldn't. I'm bloody sure I won't be on the ship with you because I think I'd rather stay right here. So therefore, we have to look at ways that we can manage this with us here and with our farming practices. How do we blend the two together? So managing water, I remember this was back in 2013, I think, very early in the days of our training course. We went up to, I think this was Theodore, somewhere in Queensland anyway, and that was before I lived in Queensland. You went up there, the hats were all bigger, the boots were bigger, the belts were bigger, and everything happened bigger in Queensland. And I can assure you, now I live there, it's true. All of that happens. It's exactly right. So these guys said, oh, geez, those pissy little banks that you're going to build, they're not going to last up here. I said, really? I think you'll find they will. But anyway, what we'll do is we'll build them 100 mils bigger if that makes you happy, you know? We'll build them to 400 mils instead of 300 mils. Okay, anyway, these guys went away after the course. It was only a 2-day course back then, so I only gave them a piece of the information. They whacked in these banks, and 2 weeks after, they had 850 mils over 2 days. So you guys could only dream about rain events like that, couldn't you? So everything does happen bigger in Queensland, doesn't it? But they were able to, those little banks that they built were able to manage that water. So if you do it right and you do it the same as nature would do it, then it will work. If you do it with a mindset of control, it will fail every time. Yeah, it's really important. How you think before you start any process determines how well something is going to work. If you base it on the level of control, you will fail every time. Very important. So this is a contour system where it's moving water from an area where it's excessively wet to an area where it's drier. So you've got a floodplain system and then you've got your slopes on the side. So the contour remains level, so water can now move at its own pace, very slowly, out, seep through the landscape and create more green. Which is what your aim, that's your aim. At the end of the day, playing around with water is only in the event you're trying to get more green plants. More green plants means a functioning small water cycle. A functioning small water cycle then has an impact on the large water cycle. That's the aim of the game. It's not about moving water around. That is really important to get that. It's not about moving water around. You're just starting a process. So here's an example where PA worked in a flow line, which we tend to try and keep out of flow lines as much as possible, because where are most of our flow lines? What part of the landscape? The bottom, aren't they? Where do we need to work? Top. Guess where it's easier to work? At the top. Much easier to work at the top. A lot less energy, and we have more of an impact. We can help the landscape rebuild. But in this example, what's the difference between the two slides? The key difference is the amount of green surface area. That's what you're aiming for. So maximising green surface area. So whatever plants you can have out there that are green and growing, that are photosynthesising, are doing that job for you. Even your blackberries, even your St John's wort, any of those plants are doing that role for you. You have to work out how that fits into your landscape. If you had let's say you are a sheep, you're running sheep or you're running cattle, and your entire landscape is covered in blackberries, how productive are you? Probably not very, are you? So therefore you have to work out the juggle between the landscape's telling you a message, that's why it's putting the blackberries there, but you need to be able to earn a living from the land. So how do we work together? That's the question you must ask. How do we work together? So nature's throwing out this plant, and this plant happens to have what? What's it got on it, apart from really delicious fruit? Thorns, hasn't it? So what does it tell you? Why is it putting a plant in there with thorns on it? Because every message it sent to you previous to that one, it was telling you, keep your stinking, rotten animals managed. And you didn't listen. So it put a plant out there that could manage the animals for you. See, the messages are all there. It's about you picking up on what they are. So bare soils, and like monocultures, how are you managing the energy from the sun? You've got sensible heat. That is the heat you feel. You know, on a hot day, you go out there and you can feel the heat. That's a sensible heat. When you've got biodiversity in your landscape, so trees, lots of green plants, they convert that heat into latent heat, the heat required to convert liquid to a gas. These are really important. Every time you think about a plant, you think about what's that plant doing for you. These are the things it's doing. Even if it's a plant you don't particularly want. It's a plant that is needed today. How you change it over, that's entirely up to you and your management. The small water cycle can increase local rainfall by 40% through the process of evapotranspiration, condensation, dew. Again, you should wake up every day thinking about how am I going to attract more dew to my landscape. That's key. So during the day, evapotranspiration of water cools the landscape. Has anyone thought about why on a hot day, let's say you're out fencing or you're out doing something, why is it that you go and have a break under the tree? You ever thought about that? Why don't you sit out in the open? Okay, what about if you're back near the house and you choose to sit under the tree rather than under the shed? They're both creating shade, aren't they? But why do you sit under the tree? It's cooler. Why is it cooler? The vapour, the evapotranspiration. What's happening is that tree is converting liquid to gas. At the same time, it's trapping heat. What does hot air do? Rises, which means you're left with cool. That's why it's cooler under the tree than under the tin shed. It's really important, very important, because that's what manages the landscape. And then at night time, condensation of water warms the landscape. So the reverse happens. The moisture that went up during the day returns at night, attracted back to the moderated temperature by the tree, and it releases, converts the other way, goes from gas back to a liquid, and what happens to the heat? The heat now warms the night. That's how it works, as simple as that. That's why you go out into a desert and it's 50 degrees during the day and minus 20 at night. That's why, because there's not the vegetation there to manage it. So if you've created left, really? Holy shit. I'm a long way behind. Okay, well, we're going to miss a portion of this presentation because Maddie has now given... I'm sure you've cut me short. I'm sure you've cut me short. Anyway, so talking about plants, this is just showing... Here we've got a plant on the left. That one's called Farmer's Friends or Sticky Beak. I bet you're all very familiar with that one. Gives you the shits all the time. Complain about it, get rid of it. Gets all those little black things stuck in with you. How many people in the room do multi-species cropping? Yep, so a couple of people. That's nature's multi-species crop. How much did it cost to sow that? 0. So all of a sudden it drops down a huge amount of biomass which does exactly the same job as your multi-species cover crop. If you start to look at plants along the same terms, then you'll find that they're actually trying to help you build your landscape for nothing. You just have to work out how to manage it. Here we've got thistles, they're doing the same thing. In this case they were mulched. What came next? Grass. Are you all trying to grow grass? Good, well done. Answered well. Everyone always goes grass because all you cow cockies or sheep farmers, all you want's bloody grass. But only when you get grass you realise you actually don't want grass. You want all plants. And guess what your animals are going to tell you? You can stick your grass, I'll have that, a bit of a feed of that, but I want this other stuff because this is my medicine. So I need all of these plants in there, not just the ones you're prepared to give them. So the filtering of water and nutrients before it leaves your landscape is imperative. How can you do that? Your contour systems, your wetlands, all of these things are filtering the water before it leaves your landscape. Keeping good cover, 100% ground cover all the time. There's another filter. All the time you want to filter it. And your landscape should be working in a continuous feedback loop. Here we've got a pond. Now this pond was built up on top of a pretty ordinary hill, a very low fertility. And you'd think, well, why the hell did you bother doing that? What's the point? Because it creates life. So you look here on that side just after it was dug, within the first rain event, that pond was full of tadpoles. How many tadpoles would have been living on top of that hill prior to that? None. What do the tadpoles do? They attract birds. Birds come up, they eat the tadpoles. What's the bird do while it's up there? Now it just added fertility up to the top of the hill where it wasn't before. So it's about starting a process. You're starting life where there's limited. That's your role. Time doesn't matter. Landscapes will heal. You just have to give it time. So water and fertility moving down this landscape, so you're recycling it at the bottom and then transferring it back up to the top. How you do that, that depends on you. Use your animals if you can train them to do that, or otherwise you would look at doing it mechanically in some way. What's your long-term goal? Your long-term goal would be to get vegetation up the top of the hill that will build fertility for you. What would that be called, do you think? Trees. Yep. Here, look at this. So anybody in the room that has blackberries, these are blackberries. Look at what the blackberries have done to the land below them. See that fertility line? The blackberries did that. They are producing fertility. Then the water starts moving the fertility. And guess what? Now the grass is healthier below the blackberries. If you pay attention and go out and look, you'll find that happening on your landscape just before you spray them. Here, look at that hill. What do you reckon's been going on there? Sheep. Apart from eating a sheep, this is the only good part about them. They transfer fertility to the top of the hill naturally. Why is that? Because they fear predators still. Where's your cow put its fertility? In the creek, in the dam, in the lowest part of the landscape, unless you teach it to do otherwise. So these sheep have been going up there probably for 100 or more years, Look at the result. Look at the change in the growth from the top of the hill. No one told the sheep to do it, did they? They just did it naturally because they want to get up there to see where their predators are coming from. They poop, they had the fertility. Anyone who has sheep, I'll guarantee you all the sheep camp is full of stinging nettle or marshmallow and all of these plants which are reacting to the excess fertility being dropped. You've got to work out how you can spread that fertility over the rest of your landscape. And what are you going to use to do that? Water. Water. It's a free taxi. It's moved by gravity, costs you nothing. All you have to do is to implement the things that help the water move. Pretty easy. Can anyone see what's on that piece of paper? Oh, shit, sorry. Can you see what's on it now? Can you see what's there? That's a silver bullet. If you can't see it, then obviously it doesn't exist. Everyone wants something, the next thing, to be a silver bullet. What we're talking about is not a silver bullet. It's a tool, like every other one. And you want to have as many tools in your toolbox as you can possibly have. Never, ever exclude a tool out of your toolbox. The moment you do that, you are limiting your options. You do not know what you will need next. Keep your toolbox full. What you have to learn is when is the appropriate time to use that tool. So by implementing natural sequence farming and restoring a natural landscape function, you are building natural capital, improving productivity and increasing your resilience to fire, flood and drought. And those last two, remember, although our government doesn't tell us so, those last three things are all a result of the same thing. Every time we see governments respond to a fire or a flood or a drought, they make out that it's something different. It is not. It is all a result of exactly the same thing. So when you work on a landscape, you are looking to manage all three of those in one go. Just don't hope to get funding for all three of them at once, because our government doesn't look at it that way. You want to learn more about us? That's it. How have I done, Maddie? Look at that. See, professional.
My mantra for the last 25 years or so, since I've been running the consultancy, has been that I think that livestock, grazing livestock, ruminant animals, are probably the most important tool we've got to regenerate land. And that's really where I'm coming from. And so talking about grazing for drought resilience is a bit up my alley. So essentially when we're talking about drought, we're really talking about three phases of drought. So the first, of course, is when you're in the middle of it. That's probably the most front of mind when we talk about drought. And this one here, thanks Maddie. These here are my girls in the middle, or no, it was the middle of what people commonly refer to as the worst drought in memory. And so when you're in the middle of drought, the sort of things you're thinking about are actually actively managing it. You know, whether or not you keep stock, whether you sell stock, whether you feed them, what you feed them. Are you going to substitute feed them? Are you going to supplementary feed them? Are you going to adjust? You know, there's all sorts of things that are going on when you're in the middle of drought, and most of them not pleasant. And then you've got drought recovery, and you know, this is a really important part of the drought phase as well, because this is when you really need to be nursing those perennial plants that are present to get back to their full productive potential. So you really need to be looking after the plants and trying to encourage as much regrowth as quickly as possible, which often means, you know, resting those paddocks from grazing as much as possible. And then you've got the planting phase. And I'm just looking around as I was driving into town, and certainly at my place at the moment, this is the phase that most of us are in, and it's sort of a nice, comfortable phase at the moment, but it's the best time to be planning for drought. So the key is that, what you do in the middle of drought depends on, how well and how quickly you're going to recover from it. And what you do in the planning phase depends or will influence how quickly you go into a drought. So there's all sorts of things that come into play, and at any point in time you're going to be on one point or other of that roller coaster, either getting prepared for drought, in drought, or looking at coming out of it. So, and things can change so quickly. I was only talking to somebody the other day. I think not 4 weeks ago I was sort of starting to think about who to sell because it was dry, hadn't really had much rain since November. And if I don't get rain before the end of March, good rain before the end of March, then winter is pretty nasty. So I was really getting into the stage of, thinking about who's got to go and how many have got to go and that sort of thing. And then on the 9th of March, it started to rain. And then through March, I had 6 inches of rain, which was great, except it didn't put anything in the dams. And then last week, I got another 2 inches, and now my dams are full. So, things change so quickly, and, it's a matter of, being prepared for wherever you are on the spectrum of in, out, or working towards a drought. So, an important question is, what is it? Because lots of people have different ideas. I was working with a group on the North Coast some time ago, and these are their answers to the question that I posed. And fortunately, I think they must have been to one of my workshops. They were talking about feed rather than rainfall to a large extent. So, poor rainfall over the growing season, not enough to grow dry matter and the like. So the thing is that, everybody's going to have a variable definition of drought. And
Can you just hold it a bit closer to you?
sorry, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And for me, my definition of drought is around herbage mass. How much ground cover I've got, how much feed I've got available to maintain the livestock. So it's less to do with rainfall and more to do with the amount of feed that's on the ground. What are the effects? And these are just a few that I've put together without a great deal of thought, but just some examples in terms of production. You've got reduced forage, reduced pasture growth, generally reduced yield and reduced carrying capacity. There's obviously economic costs, and then you've got, and probably the most important, I think, part of drought is the social ramifications, feelings of isolation, the workload with feeding stock, if you're going down that path, is generally increased. There's an emotional cost, if you keep the stock, and there's an emotional cost if you sell the stock. So, there's all of those things that come into it. And, when you get into the drought, obviously, and like whatever it was, the 2016 to 2019, I could not conceive that I could go over 1,000 days without generating any pasture growth. You can't plan for those things very effectively, but you can plan for recovery and coming out of those things, or that sort of situation. So, you get feelings of anxiety and depression, those sorts of things associated with what's going on with your land and your livestock. And certainly, I'm going to talk about feed budgeting later, but that was to my mind, feed budgeting is really the critical thing when it comes to managing drought. And having that sound grazing plan is really, really important in reducing all of the effects, so that you can make informed decisions, rather than and plan for those times rather than making those decisions when you're in crisis. So just on that, and following on, I think from a point that Stuart made, you've got this fence in the middle of the slope, theoretically the same soil type, theoretically the same environment, experiencing the same rainfall. The one on the left is in serious drought. The one on the right is comfortable. So, it's obviously more than rainfall that causes drought, as we define it. So, you've got essentially a desert on the left-hand side there. I use this photograph, it's out of a publication that the LLS put together, but I actually know that paddock, and I've done some work with this group there on the Liverpool Plains. But the only difference, aside from that fence line, is what's happening with grazing animals on either side. And that scenario has been created by management. It's not a natural event. Similarly, this scenario on the right-hand side has been created by management as well. Obviously, they're influenced by natural events, but the creation of those respective scenarios is quite different. This is in the same general area after a 15 millimetre rainfall event. And you've got water sheeting on the lower paddock there, and there's still animals in that paddock. And there's a few pools where you've got ground cover and perennial cover. So the bottom line is managing ground cover, maintaining ground cover, and maintaining those perennial grasses in the system, and the forbs as well. But again, to my mind, a grassland is made up of a vast range of diversity of species, but the grasses are the backbone of that grassland. And that's why they're called grasslands. Generally, they're the dominant species that are present, and they're so critically important to the functioning of its ecosystems. So just sort of putting it really very simply, when you look at the processes that are going on with healthy land versus relatively unhealthy land, the surface runoff, the evaporation is minimised. It's related to the level of cover that you've got there. Where you've got no cover, the runoff and the evaporation is significantly higher. The amount of water available for growth is much lower, and the amount of water that's stored in the soil is much lower. So you've got, opposite functions happening where you've got sort of healthy and relatively unhealthy land. And if we go back to this one, whoops, too far. If you were to get 25 mils of rainfall in that environment, the paddock on the left is likely, if things were going well, 10% of that, so 2.5 mils would be going into the soil in that environment, whereas on the right, you're going to be capturing and storing, the full quota. So, one of the lovely lines I like to bring out is, people are always worried about how much rain you get, and comparing notes on how much rain you get compared to your neighbours, and the best response I've ever heard is all of it. So regardless of what that rainfall event is, if you've got a 10 mil rainfall event and you've kept 10 mils, then that's fabulous. If you've had 150 mils and kept, and that's why I was surprised I still didn't have water in dams after 6 inches. I've been keeping it in the soil, and mind you, I was very pleased to have full dams last week. It helps. I was actually, with the last drought, I was actually tossing up whether to fill the dams in or not, because they were more of a nuisance than otherwise. But anyway, I'm pleased that I've kept my dams. They're nice for other reasons. So if we look at sort of the value of perennial grasses, just very quickly, it's a very busy slide, I know, but look at the benefits of having deep-rooted perennial grasses and 100% ground cover. We're looking at enhanced turnover of nutrients, actually accelerating that nutrient cycle, because most of the life in soil is associated with plant roots. We're enhancing the stability of those soil aggregates. We're improving the porosity and the infiltration rate of that soil. We're enhancing the rate of the water holding capacity in that environment. The more plant roots you've got, the more life you're going to have in the soil. The more different plant roots you've got, the more different life you'll have in that soil. So you've got this active process and processes and that are going on constantly within the soil, and all driven by basically sunlight and water. And so, you know, the bottom line in terms of drought management, to my mind, is maintaining these plants in the best possible condition. And if you're in the business of growing livestock, then your livestock are the most important tool you've got to maintain these plants in optimal condition. Now, I'm Daugherty. I was not sure whether to include this slide in the presentation. I'm sort of glad I did, going based on what Stuart and Gail have also sort of spoken about in terms of connectivity. And you know, I'm sure that there are some wonderful programs that are benefiting from $100 million per year in the Future Drought Fund. You know, and these are just some numbers I pulled out of the publication on the website that, so this was produced in January this year. I don't know whether, can people see that? But you know, there's a whole lot of projects and partnerships, you know, $457.3 million to support the plan, to establish partnerships, to create resilience and adoption of new hubs, to build skills and capabilities, address multidimensional challenges and promote transformational change. There's not one word in a 28-page glossy document or, you know, the Flash website, not a word about soil and pasture management. It's unbelievable, you know, that you know, there's obviously lots of projects that are going on, but there's not a mention of what the plan is, what the strategy is, how to manage feed, how to manage soils, how to look after it. You know, I guess that the people that are benefiting from the funding get to do that, but you would think that for all of that investment there would be some mention of soils and pasture. So anyway, for the 100 million a year and 5 billion by 28-29, you know, the bottom line is it comes down to managing and balancing what the requirements of your livestock are with the amount of feed that you produce. You can buy well, I don't actually know how much you can buy a ruler for. I expect they're $1. The thing is, if you can measure how much grass you grow or how much herbage mass you grow, and you can measure what your livestock demands are, and that's the balance that you need to manage. So we produce these flash rulers with our company name and website on. So these days it would cost me $9 to produce these, and I think that's outrageous. So I expect you can buy a 30 centimetre ruler at a newsagent's for at least $1. So that would buy a lot of rulers. Because it really comes down to measuring herbage mass. And so without going into detail, I've been working in the business, and the business name is Agricultural Information and Monitoring Services. We've been trying to encourage people to monitor their pastures, measure pasture growth rate for 26 years now. And it really comes down to literally measuring the height of the pasture and factoring in how closely spaced plants are. And it gives you a measure for available herbage mass. And so if you can measure herbage mass, the requirements of livestock are fairly well known and stated. So you can actually plot, you know, what your average growth rate is in terms of your pasture growth. You can map your animal livestock demands. So you've got pasture growth rate and animal requirements. And because I'm mathematically challenged, DSE ratings are really much more simple for me to manage. So if a dry cow requires 10 kilograms of dry matter per day, then you know you can easily measure how many cows you can run on a pasture that's got 2,500 kilograms of dry matter per hectare. It's as simple as that. It's exactly like a cash flow budget. You measure how much you've got available and what the demand is, and then you set about matching and making sure that that balance is maintained throughout a 12-month period. because realistically, there's rarely a 12-month period. Oh, same deal. So the difference between the MLA ruler, which I'm sorry I don't know your name, Julie, is it?
Sorry, Julie, no, I'm interrupting you. It feels
No,
like
that's right.
still MLA rulers.
Yeah. So it's exactly the same principle. The difference is that the MLA ruler is sort of specific for a pasture type. We've got tools on the website available for free to adjust for different pasture types, but it's exactly the same principle. Thanks, Julie. So a kilogram, one DSE requires 1 kilogram of dry matter for maintenance, essentially. So it's a straight conversion. I always get stumped with livestock units and cow-calf units and those sorts of things. If you know 1 DSE requires 1 kilogram of dry matter, it's an easy conversion that even I can handle. So what you're dealing with here is essentially trying to match the or plan the utilisation of the excess feed that you grow during the growing season to fill this deficit that most of us experience through the winter time in terms of matching growth with animal production. And in terms of the critical dates for that feed budget, I'd suggest to you about now is the most important time of the year. I couldn't quite remember what the production curve for this environment was. It's not so this is actually a Northern Tablelands example, and everybody's going to have their own scenario in terms of optimal growth periods, but my memory was that most of the, and because I wasn't into all of this stuff when I was living at Rylstone, it was the genesis of all of this, I think. But I'm assuming that most of the growth occurs through the spring and autumn, and winter is your low growth period. So essentially you're going to be in a protein drought at least during the winter time. So it's about planning the grazing and matching the carrying capacity to that production cycle, and planning the grazing so that you're utilising the excess that's grown in the growing season with, so you're using that excess to ration out over the winter time. So with the feed budget, basically it tells you how many stock you can sustainably run, and planning the residual herbage mass and utilisation. So these are the two factors that are really associated with the drought planning phase, if you like. And that allows you to set those pasture production targets and your animal production targets, and then the feed budget is essentially the first step in planning the grazing. But that level there, planning the residual herbage mass and planning utilisation being the amount of pasture grown that you allow livestock to consume. That's the drought planning phase of the whole process. And more, so I've been doing this consultancy and working with graziers, more and more I've come to recognise the most important part of the equation, or the time, is what you leave behind and how long animals are not in an area. And that really is the key to maximising pasture growth. So with the feed budget, the things that we need for a feed budget, we need to know the grazable area. We need to be able to measure herbage mass. This is where the stick comes in. We need to allocate DSE values to estimate the requirements of our livestock and have an idea of pasture growth rate, and then set those minimum herbage mass, the residual targets. And this is what the feed budget looks like. And again, it's another busy slide, but this is an Excel spreadsheet that's available for you to download for free. The variables that you need to enter is the grazable area, the area that you're managing either as a whole or on a paddock basis. The planning period, so that's all variable and it depends on your attitude to risk to a large extent. But pretty much on the Northern Tablelands at least, we can bet that it's a fairly safe bet that there'll be very low growth through the winter. basically from the end of April, the end of April to the beginning of September at least. So, as I said, depending on your attitude to risk, you might extend that period or shorten it. Enter the type of stock that you've got, what the average DSE rating, what their average requirement will be throughout that period that you're planning for. You measure how much feed you've got available on day one. You enter how much you want or you need to be remaining on the 1st of October in this example. You assume a growth rate, and then the program calculates how much feed you've got available, how many stock units per hectare you can carry, and how many stock units in total. So all of this information is available on that website, and it's available for free. So those are the calculations. You know, given this data set, we can carry 61 PTIC cows for 183 days and have 2,000 kilograms of dry matter, which is equivalent to about 7 centimetres of pasture height in an average pasture. And those are the calculations, which I don't think we have time to go into, but all of this is available on that website. So it's essentially a process that allows you to make an informed decision based on what you know. So you can't control when you get the rain, but you certainly can control how many animals you keep to consume the amount of pasture that you've got on the ground. And these are all things that you can measure with this very technical bit of equipment. And, you know, so then you're dealing with what you know. You know, you can estimate what the likely growth rate is, and if you're really conservative, which I tend to be, over winter I'm always putting in 0 pasture growth, and anything that I get is a bonus. And then the program calculates how many animals you can carry for whatever period of time you're planning for. And I have to say, in that drought up to 2019, I was doing a feed budget every 6 to 8 weeks, just to make sure that I was on track. And I carried, I think, 60% of the stock that I had on day one for 2 years. And at the end, so when that photograph at the first slide, when I got down to 1,500 kilograms of dry matter, I still had probably 95% cover, but everything bar the 4 that wouldn't fit on the truck went. So, you know, putting your landscape first and making those decisions really puts you in good stead in terms of ongoing production and you know, regenerating land. So when it comes to, and I haven't certainly got time to go into the details of planning the grazing, but the first step in grazing planning is doing that feed budget and measuring how much feed you've got on the ground, how much you want to have left 3, 4, 5 months down the track, and then applying or maintaining the optimal stocking rate to achieve that. And in doing so, planning for optimal pasture growth, maintaining that residual herbage mass, ensuring 100% ground cover 100% of the time. That is really critical. And maintaining desirable perennial grasses. Those desirable perennial grasses are the backbone of your grazing enterprise. And it allows you to maximise water use efficiency. So, you know, going back again to that slide, that fence line slide, you know, where the desert might use 10% of a 25 mil rainfall, or on the right hand side using 100% and utilising 100% of what falls. It allows you to match stocking rate to carrying capacity and then meet your personal, financial and land and livestock goals as well. The key thing in terms of planned grazing is actually controlling where animals go and where they are at any time in the landscape. So in this example, it's really the difference between stocking rate and stock density. So for the same area of ground, if you can subdivide, thanks Maddie, subdivide the land, and there is lots of economical ways to do it. Water is always going to be the critical issue. But the more you can control the grazing and control the movement of livestock across your landscape, the more you can control residual herbage mass and the utilisation. In the scenario on the left-hand side where you've got low numbers of livestock grazing large areas for long periods of time, you have no control. You really have no control over the amount of herbage mass that is left in an area, because you have noticed, Stuart mentioned the sheep camps that are continually hammered and selectively grazed because the plants are sweeter, there's a higher level of fertility, and you'll get stands of relatively less palatable grasses that are really left until the last minute. So if you can actually manage the stock density and control the movement of those livestock across the landscape, it gives you an enormous amount of control over where animals are and how much residual you're maintaining in the landscape. The other mantra is grow more, use more, leave more. So the more you grow, the more you can sustainably allocate for your livestock, and you actually end up leaving more for the environment and for all the critters that depend on the grasslands. So in this example, I'll use my pointer as a multi-purpose stick. If you grow 10 tonne of herbage mass, then you can sustainably allow livestock to utilise 7 tonne and leave 3,000 kilos or 30%. But if you're only growing, say, 5,000 kilograms of herbage mass, then the sustainable amount of utilisation is only half of that. So you need to be looking at leaving half of that to go back into the environment. So the more you grow, the more you can sustainably utilise and the more you leave behind. And it's a win-win for your livestock production and for the landscape. And it's not uncommon for people, when they apply planned grazing, to actually double their carrying capacity within a few years, particularly in a high rainfall environment. Whereas, you know, I know of a lot of scenarios where, you know, people say that they've always run this number of stock on this paddock and they've sort of spent their lives in that paddock, and the only way is down. And just, I've got one more minute. I was at a place in Narrandera a few weeks ago, and 175 years of continuous grazing, and it was devastating. The land, 10,000 hectares of concrete was essentially what we're looking at. And it can be turned around with sustainable grazing management or regenerative grazing management. And these really are the principles that we look at, you know, reducing the number of mobs, trying to increase the number of paddocks per mob. So really, the more paddocks you have per mob, the more control you have over that grazing. If you base the movements on the available herbage mass, so then the timing is going to be flexible, so that we're not into a structured, you know, set number of days in a rotation or set recovery periods. You need to really focus on measuring the herbage mass and allocating the appropriate number of stock in the appropriate area for the appropriate time based on that. Develop a grazing plan, monitor pasture growth, and the most important thing, I believe, is controlling how much of what you grow is utilised by livestock. Thank you.
I feel very fortunate to be standing in front of you all today. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land, the Wiradjuri Nation, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I recognise their connection to country and their role in caring for and maintaining country over thousands of years, and especially to Gail for the most beautiful and pertinent welcome to country I've been a part of and heard. The we I will talk about is my Australian wife, Sarah, and our two children, Finn and Neve, who spent the early years of their lives in Africa. I'm a native South African and have, for my entire life, been very involved and connected to and feel a part of nature. I've always had a deep interest in natural history as a foundation of ecology. Before leaving South Africa 14 years ago, we ran a horseback safari operation in Isimangaliso Wetland Park, which was a World Heritage Site. Prior to that, we lived in Botswana, in the Okavango Delta, and I was a specialist private guide there, hosting guests on their safaris in the wilds of Botswana, Namibia, Zambia, Zimbabwe, and South Africa. And Sarah taught locals to cook and operate five-star safari camps. Africa is truly an amazing place, and holding it together is not only its diverse and abundant wildlife and natural beauty, but it has a soul, which I think stems back to where it all began. I hosted guests who came back every year as they too felt these connections. Sorry, just to get the line through. These connections, that feeling of soul. And I just read on Instagram of a lady, Ava Spitzer. This is her 40th time coming back to the Okavango in her time, which is, special. And it was a privilege to be able to share my love of nature in the many hours talking about its splendor. We moved to Australia in 2011 to Balala, which is situated up there, and we're at Gulgong, over there. And it's a 1,250 hectare property, which is a remnant of one of the first runs in the New England, having been established in 1841. It is on Anawan land. Before we get into the essence of this particular change in conversation and a new chapter in our lives, I would like to take you on a walk. A walk on a small island in the Okavango Delta, surrounded by water, in a part of Africa's Big Five bush that is truly wild and remote, where everything about you personally is challenged. Your trust, your senses, sounds, and beliefs. Nature, all feelings and vulnerabilities become acute when out there amongst the greatest level of all. We quietly climb out of our canoes, mokoros, and in single file take our first steps onto the island. The sun is just rising into a morning which is crisp. We hear the breeze rustle through the leaves and feel it cross our faces. As we move forward, the dew on the grass collects our distinctly human footprints. The bush awakens after its nighttime stillness, becoming alive with the richness of bird calls, almost deafening, as they greet the day before settling into the morning. Impala in the distance start moving about, and we watch a group of giraffe gently browsing on acacias, slowly moving into the wind. We stand in silent wonder at their size and presence. It makes one feel so small in comparison. Before continuing, we discuss the patterns which connect, how the acacia trees send pheromones out into the breeze, and tannins into their leaves, communicating with other trees that they are being browsed upon, attacked. And in turn, the next trees downwind produce tannins which make their leaves unpalatable to the giraffe. Hence, giraffe always try to browse towards the prevailing breeze to keep their food sweet. We bend to watch the ever-patient antlion wait for an ant to step into its conical trap and start its inevitable downward slide. And then silence is broken as a startled oxpecker calls out as it takes flight. And with that, one's senses become truly acute. Mentally running through my head where each person is, which way the breeze is coming from, how far is the closest cover, what may have upset the oxpecker. At this point, I give a quiet reminder of our earlier briefing. What may happen, what to do. Stay as a group, trust my choices, listen carefully to my directions, and follow them quickly. And whatever you do, don't run. I explained that if we come across lions, the likelihood of a charge will be entirely dependent on where we are and how we act together. This will affect their decision of flight or attack. That the backup guide will take control if something happens to me. Slowly taking all this into account, we calmly carry on. None of my checks and observations have been noticed because trust in me and my experience is what you, as guests here in the wild, have placed in me. Moving forward, we stand in the shade of a tree line as across the open space ahead, a large herd of buffalo moves slowly, grazing into the wind, with the old Daugherty buffaloes taking up the rear. The alarm call of the redneck Franklin breaks the calm, and I know this may well herald the only predator large enough to be stalking these sizable animals, lions. Again, all the senses rise to that acute pitch, and slowly we retreat back behind the trees. Being so vulnerable, standing in the open, is way too dangerous. We are mere mortals watching this real play unfolding. As we reach safety, suddenly the herd explodes forward, and there are the lions, a whole pride chasing in for the kill. The noise level is astonishing, as hundreds of buffalo are now splashing through the shallow water of the delta, bellowing in fear and calling out to their young, running in panic as chaos begins unfolding, water spraying in all directions. As lions head in, working together to circle a young buffalo, they are cutting away from the herd. As it bellows in distress, the big old Daugherty boys come to the rear, from the rear, head towards its calls, creating their own cacophony. The to and fro begins as the Daugherty boys form up together, united. A dangerous black wall threatening the lions, trying to push them away from the smaller animal. But today, there are too many lions, and it is all in vain as the buffalo is quickly taken down. We stand together almost in shock at the speed of this violence. As the stillness returns, the herd has thundered off and a quiet falls across the bush. And so we quietly return to our canoes and paddle back to camp, where brunch is waiting to be served. As we sit in the comfort and safety of our safari camp, we discuss what happened, how confronting it is to watch the circle of life unfold in front of you. It is always interesting sharing these leveling experiences where there is no right or wrong. It is just nature. So what's this to do with farming, you're probably thinking? Like in that, it's that trust. It's the trust, the wisdom of people like Stuart, Judi, and listening to all those around that have incredible knowledge, and there are so many that, and it's that trust of being able to follow and believe in what they're talking about. Because, being in awe of nature, appreciating it, but always thinking that we as people are in control and top of the pile is maybe given a new perspective once you have been in a situation where you are vulnerable absolutely not in control and possibly feeling threatened. You are just a mere cog in the wheel and forced to the understanding that we are just another part of nature. Observation, imploring our senses to take note of everything around us, having an empathy for everything, are practices which we all need to adopt. Through this lens is how, 14 years ago, I thought I could put into practice this understanding, farming in nature's image. We arrived at Balala in the cold, wet winter of 2011, having sold our horseback safari operation in subtropical Isimangaliso, South Africa, to a whole new venture and challenge. It was an open canvas as such. In the beginning, while finding one's feet, we had to conform. To meet our mortgage obligations, we were bound to lease the property out for 3 years for cattle adjustment. The year prior to our purchase, the property had been helicopter sprayed for St. John's wort to meet the needs of the local weed authority and a neighbour. We continued this practice and sprayed for 2 more years, wasting tens of thousands of dollars. We conformed to the expectations because we were told that as responsible farmers, this is what we had to do. The adage, it is cheaper to fix the reason than treating the symptom, hadn't occurred to me then. The farming practices we believed in was holistic management, which started with reading back in South Africa, first, Holism and Evolution by the Honourable General Jan Smuts in 1926, and then Alan Savory's works, utilising animal impact and time-controlled grazing, was a practice we wanted to follow. To achieve this on a very run-down property with virtually no fencing, we started on the wire and water route. Fortunately, having the lease arrangement enabled this to happen, and the start of the 10-hectare paddocks began. But the learning continued, and it became evident that soil was a foundation upon which everything was built. The more I learned, the more it became evident that a healthy soil is built around interconnected relationships with minerals, plants, microbiome, oxygen, water. Nothing was in silos. The whole pyramid of life, known as the soil food web, was just as important as the pyramid of life, the trophic levels above the soil. We stopped using chemicals, stopped using synthetic fertilizers, and focused on nurturing the soil microbiome. Biodiversity was key. Balala is in a brittle environment. We have old soils, very little organic matter, and always being 2 weeks off a drought was a reality. Drought resilience is very important, and to this end, increasing organic matter in our soils, holding as much water in our landscapes as possible, and balancing minerals in our soils to overcome compaction, allowing oxygen in it so life can breathe, is our recipe. One of them. It is important as a business owner to address practices of productivity and profit. These keep the engine running and the wolf from the door, but the challenge is doing it in a manner that is enlightening and gives a sense of pride, being a true steward of the land for the benefit of the land. The practices we have been involved in are varied. We have merinos for superfine wool, Hampshire Down sheep for intramuscular fat and crossbred lambs, pasture-raised Tamworth heritage pigs, and Black Angus cattle. Each has its place in the farm. We run Balala Butcher Box, making our own salami, charcuterie, smoked Christmas hams, nitrate-free bacon, and a variety of sausages, as well as producing delicious lamb, hogget, and pork for direct-to-consumer sales in monthly boxes. We supply our local community through Urala markets. we, when finances have allowed, put in, apologies. So the practices that we follow we have cover cropping or multi-species, and when finances have allowed, we have put in summer and winter cover crops to address resource issues in trying to increase the organic matter in our soils, and also biodiversity for pollinators, etc., in the whole landscape. I brew biofertilizers and stimulants to spray out, addressing mineral issues in an inorganic-chelated form. We have spread a lot of chicken manure, and when the calendar and the cash flow sync, we also spray out biodynamic soil activator. And all of these practices really come down to listening to a YouTube video many years ago from Gabe Brown, where it was saying, if you're not trying, if you're not losing money, you're not trying. Well, not making mistakes, you're not trying. Put it that way. Working with others is important to us. We have been involved in the RAMPS, which is a Regenerative Agricultural Monitoring Program through the Savory Institute, looking at high-density stocking rates in safe-to-fail areas with a 6-month, 12-month rest periods. All the soil tests have been done in controlled areas, and then in the paddock next door, we are part of Land to Market and the Australian Holistic Management Cooperative, and have our ecological outcome verification, which we've had sort of continuing for 4 years, which has then led on to being Land to Market verified for our meat product, the butcher box story. We try to work with the principles of natural sequence farming and the principles of that. And we've worked with the Maluna Institute through their Community of Practice program, though things got in the way in business, and that's been a bit slow. And Erin's torn her hair out with me. And we were very fortunate that our neighbour, Tim Wright at Lana, and Tim first got us involved in the National Environmental Science Program, which was the NESP project, which was we were one of 14 farms in that program. And that was with Sue Ogilvie and Mark Gardner from Vanguard, which then led on to being involved in the Latrobe study, and it was all based around natural capital accounting. And then that morphed into the current Farming for the Future program. And it's been fantastic actually being involved in that whole program. But coming back to the soils. So for close on 10 years, we've been involved, So these are just some of the things on the soils. Been involved with regards to Landcare Australia and Farm Lab and doing soil organic matter, soil organic carbon across the property. More trying to understand Imogen Semler. We've had a couple of baseline sites on the property where we do a whole cross spectrum from plant tissue test to Haney test to just see what's happening and it's very much like how we've been involved with the ecological outcome verification. Every year they come back and they audit the 14 sites, and every 5 years they've got 2 long-term monitoring sites, which is a longer-term thing, and that's just on that slide there. But coming back to our involvement and contribution back to society, people. For close on 10 years, we've been involved in saving the endangered Bell's turtle as a landholder, working with researchers for the duration of the project. We have a large colony, 4 species of microbats that cohabit with us in the slab timber walls of our home, which are very well documented by researchers from our local university. A research paper has been written about the leucistic platypus in the Ramallah, and we are proud to share Balala with a breadth of healthy native animals. Feral animals are not so welcome, and we work hard at trying to keep them at bay. One of the greatest threats to the Bell's turtle are foxes that have learnt to take the turtle eggs, and they smell and they then train their younger ones. So that's been the biggest issue in the Bell's turtle and with their demise. But all of these practices, and they're, the myriad of them, but all of these practices still have to be balanced with what your holistic context is, the why, how, and what. I believe the foundation of our practices and context in which we farm is that soils are the key pillar, the basis which holds us together. Understanding our natural systems better is the key, not whether one is holistic, regenerative, organic, conventional, reductionist. These are all just words, the little boxes which we place ourselves in so others can understand. Hats we wear which define to others who we are and what our beliefs are. Nature is self-organizing. Every day, nature speaks to us, all day, every day. We just need to listen. But nature is self-organizing in ways that we may never fully understand. We need to continually try to understand. We need to not be in contrast, but be working with, in an empathetic way, to be just another part of the natural system as Mother Nature would want. For millennia, our planet has existed, changed, created, and destroyed, utilizing the same simple ingredients that we still have access to. I believe in observation, listening to our senses, being vulnerable, all hand in hand, leading us in being humble. In Africa, there's a word. It's called Ubuntu, which means I am because you are. A person is a person through the other people, the belief in a universal bond of sharing that connects all humanity. I extend this to believe all humanity with nature. I believe that our collective well-being is intertwined. Humans are only part of a balanced biodiversity. Everything is interdependent with others, whether those others are plants, animals, or our fellow humans. Ubuntu is a way of life, and it has encompassed both the goodness of humanity and the beauty of nature. I believe there's a reverence to Mother Nature, God, subtle energy, the spiritual realm, whatever words resonate with you. A reverence to traditional ways of life. We all need a sense of place. We are all indigenous to Earth. Thank you.
What does drought resilience look like on a working property? Not just in theory, but in practice. This one's directed for Judi, but if you guys want to riff on that.
So my policy is to never graze a paddock down below 2,500 kilograms of dry matter per hectare at any time during the growing season, so that I've always got a drought reserve. That doesn't always happen, but that's my objective. I think I mentioned that a month ago I was looking to destock because I was getting down to the level of about 2,000 kilograms. That I only had 4 paddocks left before the animals were going back onto a land that I considered was not suitable for regrazing. So if I aim for 2,500 residual, then by the end of winter I'm at about 2,000 kilograms. So coming into the spring, and that still gives me what I consider to be 500 kilograms of dry matter in reserve. So it's very much, and I guess I've been measuring pasture for 20 odd years, so I've got a visual of how much feed that I've got available. So that's why I'm talking numbers, but 1,500 kilograms of dry matter in an average pasture is equivalent to 5 centimetres cover. And it comes back to what Stuart was talking about, you know, how much grass you grow, how effectively you can capture sunlight. So once you graze a perennial grass below 5 centimetres green leaf, you're grazing root reserves. Whenever there's 5 centimetres of green leaf, photosynthesis drives regrowth. So if you consider the roots to be the fuel tank of the plant, my aim is to, as far as possible, not damage a root in the ground.
Thanks, Judi. Does anyone else on the panel want to speak to that? So what does drought resilience look like on a working property, not just in theory, but in practice?
This feels a little bit like a firing squad. Not the first one I've been in either, by the way. I mean, I agree completely with what Judy's just expressed. At the end of the day, maintaining green surface area is the key. The thing that's very hard for you to manage is how long a dry continues for. So no matter how much grass cover you keep, you can't always maintain it green because that's in the lap of the gods. But there are other plants in your system that will stay green no matter what, and they are the trees. So maintaining trees as part of your ecosystem is really, really critical, because if you can keep the small water cycle functioning, even in a dry time, that will support your pastures. Yeah, I think that's probably the key for me. If you have it set up right, then the next thing, as Judi spoke about, the next thing is when it rains, how is your landscape going to respond?
Great, thank you. So another question, this one's from Julie. So a question for all the presenters, if you want to. If there was one thing that you could change in the agricultural system in New South Wales at the minute, what would it be? What's your elevator pitch to either Albo or the other bloke, come May 3rd, for the best things they could do to help us look after our land and feed our nation? Take that to put you on the spot.
Talk about your drought resilient funding, Judy. Where all that money goes.
So what do you think the best things that they could do to help us look after our land?
You can hand that to me, I'll give it. I think the best thing that government could do, I guess there's a couple of things, and this will be hard for some of you to take probably. Funding is one of the worst things that you can have that prevent you from doing stuff. Because unfortunately with funding, you get tied to how you can use it, which limits your possibilities. The one key for how we fix our landscapes, like I said at the end of my talk, is never remove a tool from the toolbox. Funding limits the amount of tools that you can use. So at the end of the day, the best thing government can do is get the hell out of our way and let us do it.
I think that's the same with looking at it from an Aboriginal perspective, and the government has thrown money at the problem of Aboriginal people, and with that money comes, this is what you're going to do with it. So they give you the money, but then say, this is how you're going to use it, not listening to what needs to be done. Not looking at it from the perspective of how it really needs, what needs to be done to help. And it's the same with land management. They're not listening to what needs to be done to help the issue.
You've got to keep the bureaucrats. We've got to staff the bureaucrats.
That's it.
They run the government, the bureaucrats. Not the ministers, the bureaucrats.
So money's not the problem.
It seems to be the solution that's for everything, regardless of whether it's the health system, the natural resources, the Aboriginal issues. It's not going to be solved by throwing money. It's about empowering people to make informed decisions, I think, for themselves.
And for them to listen.
Yes.
They don't listen.
No, that's not their best thing.
No.
At the end of the day, you guys are the teachers. Don't rely on the supposed leaders to lead you. You are the leaders. Lead.
Did you want to weigh in on that, Richard?
Yeah, I have very strong views on this whole funding issue, and it's still through the lens of which those politicians are looking at it, because even when it comes down now to methane reduction and how we now, in the next couple of years, and having been involved in a lot of agro-politics with regards being on numerous committees with New South Wales farmers, even now, the solution to reducing methane on your double book entry keeping, which is going to come into place in a couple of years, is to put more synthetic fertilizer or more fertilizer on the ground, to put more nitrogen on the ground, to grow your animals off quicker, so that you can now balance your story, or plant trees, which is this other thing. Is just one of the issues in all of that. The amount of money that's getting thrown for drought to try and find some new innovative way of trying to figure out how nature works is, the panacea for how we're going to get out of a drought. These things it's the money, if there's money, and there is money that's being thrown because it's a need that have to be done as government to be responsible for the people, but it just is going in all the wrong directions, and it never actually invariably ends up being on the ground at a grassroots level to follow practices of those simple things. Well, not simple things, they're all interconnected things of principles that we've just been talking about this morning.
Thanks for that, Richard. And I think that just ties in with what Stuart said about you won't learn anything unless you actually go do it. So I guess that's a takeaway, even though what you said is true, that it may not end up at the grassroots level. So make sure what you learn here today, you take it and you run with it and you actually do something about it. Thank you for that answer. We have another question. So what are your suggestions for engaging young people in conversations for change? What has worked for you so far? Is this a challenge we need to consider for our future? It's a tricky question.
It's a really hard thing. I listened to a podcast the other day with the owners of Rennie Angus, and what really struck home to me was, the beauty of what I do is through the context of how one looks at it, and it's having those challenges and trying to do what one's doing on the land for personal reasons. But at the end of the day, what she was saying was that trying to get her children to come back to the farm and being a poverty farmer was no shining light for them to say, this is what I want to do. So productivity and profit have a big thing in that play. But it's also coming back to, we were trying to get that connection with youth, younger farmers, back onto the land, that there is something there other than you can still have productivity and profit, but there's this balance that occurs in this natural system, understanding where it all comes from.
Where am I going to go from there? No, look, that's key. Everywhere I go, we've got silver tops like this, all over the place. And we need to bring in the younger people, because it's really, really great that we've got the older generation out there creating change, but it goes nowhere when we're all dead. Yeah? So how do we get younger people in? I've always believed for a long time the only way you get community involved is to get community involved. How can you get people who are removed from farming interested in farming? Well, guess what? There's only one avenue. Everyone, as far as I know, eats food. Therefore, you must always take it back to food. Farmers produce food. So the way to bring young people in is to introduce them through food. That's how you get them back in. And then the end result is farmers like us up here hopefully create an environment that attracts young people to want to come back there. At the end of the day, if you can go into town or into the city and get a $150,000 paying job, why the hell would you work on a farm? You know, that's the difference between the two. And so if you can create that environment, in our case, we created a farm that has enough diversity in it, and our oldest person on the farm is 30-something, early 30s. Most of our team are early 20s. The farm is run by our two sons, 26 and 22, and they are the future at attracting young people. That's how you do it. It's the only way it will work. So it's not easy and it won't be instantaneous, but that's the way we need to do it. Us old farts up here talking all the time won't do it for them. We're just not inspiring enough, unfortunately.
I think you would be surprised at how much our children know today. Here at Red Hill, Peter, Beck and the whole team work tirelessly of passing on the information that those younger generations need to make informed decisions into our future. I think we would be surprised at how much they already know. And those kids will be those changes of the future. So don't discount them. Have faith, because I'm sure that the knowledge that they're getting now is what's going to make the difference. They're receiving knowledge that none of us ever had. So have faith.
I just thought of something. Because essentially, I run my little block. It's 1,100 acres, pretty much on my own. My girls get upset when I bring people in to help, so we just do it quietly. But so I don't really get to interact with young people so much. But the point about making the point that I'm doing it alone is that, you know, people always push the message about how hard farming is, that it's a really hard job and a hard lifestyle. I've got a really good farm sitter that comes a couple of days a week, you know, when I'm off doing these things, and he does the hard stuff, like, you know, putting the fence posts in and fixing the fences. I just, you know, and I think that that's the other thing, is it actually, it's just so wonderful when you're in an environment that is regenerating and is flourishing. That place that I was at last week that I've mentioned, you know, 6 days was enough. I was over it. It was so depressing. When you're in a dying landscape, it is really hard work. When you're in a landscape that is flourishing and alive and flowing, it's just a joy. And I think that's the message that needs to be put across as well.
Thank you, guys. Some great answers. So, one from Sarah. Are there any other solutions to reducing kangaroos over grazing other than exclusion fencing? Has anyone had experience with that?
Why is it I always end up with a microphone? That's really good. I'm glad you brought up exclusion fencing, because I have a really big beef with exclusion fencing. If you think about, what are you trying to do when you put up an exclusion fence? You're trying to restrict the movement of animals through your landscape, is that going to be beneficial or detrimental? At the end of the day, it will be detrimental. But there's a bigger thing that I don't think we give enough thought to, and that is, how does the exclusion fence affect our neighbour? So what do you think it will do if you have the money to put up an exclusion fence around your place, but your neighbour doesn't have the same reserves to do it around their place? Do they now have all of your animals that would have been on your place now on their place? Do you think that might piss them off just a little bit? And so now you've got people, neighbours, arguing or not getting along simply because you put a fence up. So there's bigger issues to deal with. How do we deal with the situation we've created? We've changed the environment such that our native animals, the management mechanism that was in place to manage their levels is gone. We put in water, we hold more feed in places, and so all of the mechanisms that would prevent them from breeding are gone. So we're the problem. Again, I mean, if you look at a problem, everyone relates back to us at the end of the day. So that becomes our problem to deal with. Now, as a farmer, which I am, and I don't know how many of you guys are, how do you then spend the time and warrant what's needed to manage the numbers? And what is the number that you need to manage? The only way you can do it is to create a value on doing that. Therefore, we should be utilising these animals, if they need to be managed, to eat, for food. You know, it's not hard to do this, but of course, once again, government steps in, gets in the way and says, oh no, you can't do that, because we love the cute and cuddly kangaroos running around the place, which we do, and they're critical. They're a critical component of the ecosystem, so long as the numbers are balanced. We go out there, we remove the mechanisms to manage them, so we don't like wild dogs because they eat our sheep or our cattle, so we shoot the dogs, the dingoes. They used to manage the kangaroos. All of the mechanisms we remove and then think it's going to take care of itself. It can't. So I think putting a value on a product and utilising it for something useful is probably the best way of managing those. Exclusion fences just pisses neighbours off.
Yeah, I mean, not necessarily kangaroos. It is, you know, in any situation where, I don't know whether you saw Foreign Correspondent on earlier in the week on the elephants in the Okavango. It is, any situation is going to be in a case where human-animal conflict is an issue. This animal-human conflict is in that it's eating your grass. But I agree, it comes back down to this we are in a managed environment, and we, I think, created a lot of those issues in allowing that for them to flourish, for any species to really flourish, which is a good and a bad thing. So putting a value on product, I know is because somewhere in Africa, in Botswana now, that question is going to come in to whether or not you're going to not kill those elephants or do something, or end up in a desertification. And some of that footage that you saw of how much grass was around and what was left behind after the elephants is, I know it's seasonal, but is really was really confronting. So it is all a balance.
Well, you probably haven't got anything much to add, but I just figure if I can't feed a few kangaroos, then I'm doing something wrong.
Maddie?
Yeah.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
How does Alan Savoury deal with the wildlife when he's doing his management in that landscape? Does he account for those numbers in his numbers when he works out his grazing chart, so to speak?
Yeah, my understanding with how Alan does it is that they are all, so it's like a multi-species cover crop. It's a multi-species grazing operation that occurs in Alan's property, Dimangombe. And you know, they are all apart. And coming back to Judy's thing, if I can't, you know, it's also if you can't produce enough grass to feed a couple of kangaroos, and the same in Alan's thing. Alan doesn't do that, but when you're coming into areas where you're coming into that, you know, 130,000 elephant in Botswana, it becomes a very different thing from when Alan's earlier work that he did in Zimbabwe, which turned him around on that. So he works with it. They're all a part of his farming system.
The other thing that Alan does, I believe, at least in the early days, he had, well, I think there was a few people that would kraal. Is that what it's called over there? That would actually, so to protect them from the lions and other predators, they would actually kraal the animals of an evening.
Yeah.
So.
But they've got the manpower there's the manpower to do that, to bring in all the animals at night into a corral.
There's another thing that we need to look at with our whether they're native animals or non-native animals is how they are reacting with the landscape, and are they really reacting with the landscape in a negative way? I think you'll find a lot of the animals, or all of the animals out in the landscape, like the plants, are merely responding to our management of the landscape. And as we remove species out through our management, they are then replaced by something else that you may consider to be inappropriate. However, nature is merely putting in place what is required to help restore that landscape back. So, you know, I have this discussion with farmers all over the place. It's the same thing. They don't like kangaroos or whatever because there's too many, and they're concentrating on managing their grazing, which is fantastic, and the kangaroos, because of their numbers, makes it very difficult to do that. But you think about a kangaroo, which it doesn't matter what animal it is, but let's use kangaroo. Rich has probably got pigs up there, similar sort of thing. But what does the kangaroo actually do? The kangaroo eats a plant over here and then shits it out over there. When it dies on the same landscape it ate on. Unlike what you do, it takes nothing away. All of it remains in the system. So they still work as part of this entire ecosystem. We just don't find it appropriate because it affects our ability to do what we do. So, you know, you're not really losing anything by having those animals as part of your system, and they are critical in there. It's just how we maintain the numbers so that we can have some, they can have some.
Thank you. So we have one from Cheryl. Maybe I'll let you ask it, Cheryl.
It's what conversation do you think is most missing at the moment from restoring our land?
I think in the next period of time, it's more about coming back to what Stuart was talking about, that we produce food and everyone eats food, and it's that understanding and buying power of food which is going to, in the end, determine or dictate practice. And I think what's going to happen in the next period of time is that more and more awareness of youth on how food is produced and the quality of food and that which they are eating is going to be will drive the practice that occurs in creating that nutrient-dense food. And I think that is going to, I know it is the new glossy word and glossy phrase, but I think that it is really going to, because in being able to create nutrient-dense food, you're having to deal with a healthy plant and healthy soil to be able to achieve that. And to achieve that, you have to undertake practices which enable that. And I think once that starts happening, that is going to drive change in this conversation, whether, you know, because we're always going to, and you're going to put yourself back into those boxes of the type of farming that you do and justifying that type of farming. But if no one's buying your product, you may change and may look at other ways of doing it.
I agree 100%. Yeah, that's right. And with the comment about Richard about boxes, worst thing you can do. Don't put yourself in a box, don't put anyone else in a box. You do what you do for why you do it. It's not for anyone else to tell you that you belong there in that box, because the moment you do that, that person now has to try and escape that box. And it's very difficult to do that. You know, so I don't like all of these references that, you know, you are regenerative and you are conventional and whatever, because it prevents us actually moving forward. We end up trapped in there. So not putting people in boxes, that's a good start. And nothing will happen unless we get people thinking about food. And you people and all of your friends and all of the people you know out there are the eaters. They determine how farmers farm. It's not the farmer that determines it, it's you. You eat the bloody food. You walk into Woolworths or Coles and you demand a cheaper product. Well, a farmer will be forced to produce a cheaper product, and the land will be what has to pay. The farmer can't pay, because at the end of the day, the farmer will go broke and they won't be there anymore. It will always be the land that pays. And so if you want change, it has to be about you. That's it. And the thing you can do is every day you can make that decision. At least 3 times a day you get a choice. And that choice leads your supposed leaders into their choices. You hold all the power, you just don't realise it. So take back the power and use it.
Australia's land has always been managed. Indigenous people were farmers of the land, but they worked within the landscape, exactly what we're talking about here today. So it's always been managed and cared for and worked with. So we just have to keep going with what we're doing here.
I guess on that point, Gail, in terms of why I press the point where I think livestock are the most important tools to regenerate land is because we've lost so much biodiversity. We've lost so many animals, so many plants, but most particularly the biota in the soil, and it's the ruminant animal with that vat of microbes that is really the seed to actually start to restore that land. And I get annoyed just to address the question more directly, I suppose, the value of land. We seem to value land that is cropped much, much higher than native landscapes and natural environment. And I think that's the natural environments that we depend on, aside from the food production side of things, in terms of ecosystem services, clean air, clean water, those sorts of things.
So just on that note that Judi was saying, I heard Will Harris from White Oak Pastures talking, where he was saying about what he's done. So over 25 years, he's increased his organic matter in the soil. And it hasn't increased the value of his land per acre as people will value it. If he had spent 25 years and put on 100 weight of super, 100 weight of super, it would have had a value And that we need to change the way land is valued back onto actually what's in the soil rather than what has been applied. And I think that soil organic matter is a lot of that, as to what Judi was saying.
Thank you. That takes us to another question from Alice. Are emerging natural capital markets a potential enabling force for regenerative practices, or do you think they're at odds with the principle of listening to and respecting the land?
Selling something that's free is bullshit. End of story. The moment someone tries to sell you something that's free, question it, because there will be ulterior motives behind it. As a land manager, you should want to improve your land because it's going to improve your productivity. End of story. You don't need to be paid for that. That should be part of your everyday operation. If you were doing something special, let's say you want to go and do something like what we're talking about, and you're trying to manage or repair a landscape that's been degraded by generations prior. Now, there might be a larger cost for doing that. So if you're going to do that, you go back to the public and you say to the public, listen, I want to be able to produce food in a way that's more conducive to regenerating a landscape. Are you prepared to pay me extra for my produce, enabling me to do that? And they will go, yes or no. End of story. And you move forward from that. That is really the best way you can go about it. Selling something that's free is fraught with danger. I use this analogy for people all the time. If we say these people sitting in the front row, we've got Tim here, and Tim's a corporation. He's considered to be a polluter. He's adding carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. You're a bad man, Tim. Very bad. And Stu over here, he's got a good name, so he's obviously the farmer. So he's a farmer. So Tim says to Stu, I'm going to give you money to store carbon to offset the damage that I'm doing. Yep. And over here, sorry, what's your name? Kim. So over here, Kim is someone who's an average person buying products. And so Tim, as a corporate person, what does he do when he has an extra cost? He adds a price to what he produces, doesn't he? Well, in this case, Tim's producing fertiliser. Stu buys fertiliser, no matter what it is, but Stu buys the fertiliser. So now Tim paid Stu for his carbon offset, and then Tim charged Stu more money for his fertiliser, so then he paid it back to Tim. Over here, the poor old consumer, Tim now puts the price on his food for what happened, so the consumer now has to pay more for the food, and where does that go back to? Back to the beginning. So it's a crock of shit. And all the same, Judi, yeah, 100%, you know? So the whole lot is just a furphy. Please, please, please look into it very carefully before you sign yourself up to that stuff. At the end of the day, work on the basis that you improve your landscape, it will improve your health and everybody else's along with it.
Yeah, we might move on because there's a few more really good questions I'd love to get to. So taking a different turn now, from Liz, with our area going under with a lot of solar panels and wind turbines, what are your thoughts on the impact on our landscapes, especially as they have a life expectancy of 25 years?
So you're just going to think that I just got an opinion on everything. You'd be right, I do. But I won't say it. I have lots of opinions. You don't have to agree with them. It's okay. That's the beauty. It's a free world. An experience of ours. We have a solar farm, not far from our farm in Gympie, and about 2 years ago we had this massive storm come through from the northwest. That storm, this was a wind storm. That storm was directly in exactly the same direction as the solar farm. Now, when we have that same area that was is now a solar farm under plants, what's the difference? The area is cool as long as the plants are green. The moment you replace those green plants with solar panels, you are capturing energy, but what are you doing with the heat? The heat is remaining, which means now you've got this massive pocket of heat that can't be utilised. So that energy transforms into something else. What does it transform into? Wind. And the wind is highly destructive. So, you know, we go and place these things in one area and think that it's going to solve all of our problems. Why is it that our governments aren't pushing to put solar panels on every roof in the country? In which case, we would solve our energy issues by putting it on existing infrastructure without taking out land that could be having an environmental function, let alone a productive function. So again, I think all of that stuff, it's all based on the fact that carbon is a problem and these are our solutions. None of it will solve that at all, ever.
Alrighty, I'd like to open up if anyone hasn't jumped on the WhatsApp and might have a question. Does anyone have any questions?
I have a question to anybody. So a lot of dams, you know, when you've got neighbours get washed down, they have got the grass coming, and we then get all the soil out of the dam, and then they just tend to lump up beside the dam. Would you suggest there that the best thing to do is just spread that back out onto the ground?
Have you been at something that I've spoken at before?
No, I just was having a debate with my father.
Okay, you better tell me who had what idea first before I answer it.
Yeah.
Look, at the end of the day, the fertility that's now in your dam came from up there. Best thing you can do, if it's economically viable, is take it back up there. This is the lunacy as us as humans, what we do. We take all of our fertility and we put it in the lowest part of the landscape, which does bugger all for you. So we allow nutrients to flow into our waterways, and then we go, well, what are we going to do now? Oh, we'll add more fertility up there, but we're not actually transferring the fertility from where it went to back to the top. So in the case of cleaning out dams, the first thing I would say is, why is the sediment running into the dam? That'd be first, because I'd be looking at what's the management practices that are allowing for that to happen. Let's say it's beyond your management that happens, then yes, you clean the dam out, take it back up, put it out on a ridge somewhere where that fertility can make its way back down again, but hopefully a whole lot slower than what it came there in the first place. So I hope that was on your side and not your dad's side, and I hope your dad's not here.
Thank you. Is there any other questions? All right, I have one last question. Sorry if we didn't get to some of them. Maybe we can finish off on a high note. So could you each use the word vision to describe your idyllic future? My vision is...
You want me to start again?
You're on a roll.
I think I'll keep it simple. I like to keep everything relatively simple. My vision is to have a greener landscape over a longer period of the year than we currently have. However we achieve that, we are winning.
The vision I have is, in some way, as farmers, to be not recognised, but the understanding of what is done, so that there is this for youth to come back into farming, into these rural areas, etc. And I know that it's far more attractive to be in these big city areas and etc., especially at a younger age, but there's got to be something back, and it comes back down onto, and I know it's a longer question, I mean a longer answer, but it comes back down onto the natural capital issues, or where the ones in with there are consequences, but also with these, we're in a renewable energy zone, and it's all around us. And either you're in it or you're not in it, but you can't change it because it's a government, it's a whole government thing where that dot has been put on the map. So it's trying to change and make farming or rural ways of life inviting for the youth to stay there.
I think that my vision is that we're not the exception, that we're the rule. The way that we think becomes the rule, not the exception.
I'm very clear on what my vision is for me. I'm not so big on what my vision should be for everybody else, but
give it a whirl.
I guess, yeah, it's already been said, but I like to keep things simple. I think we tend to overcomplicate things, and a bit, going back to the drought fund and all the funding and all the fancy, glossy magazines and websites. If we just keep things, get back to the basics, and capture more sunlight, keep more water in the soil, get the landscape restored. It makes a big difference in terms of how we view the landscape and value the landscape, and encourage more young people to look at it that way as well, rather than it being a chore. And I think that would go a long way to addressing a lot of the health issues. I keep coming back to that. I don't know why today, but I think there's lots of things that could be solved by changing the way that we look at the environment, and I guess that's vision, isn't it?
I just want coming back on Stu's thing. I mean, it really is having that inquiring mind and asking as well. And the issues like on that small water cycle, and it's something that really, if you've got the time, or to have a look up, to understand what that small water cycle is and the importance of it, or the biotic pump that occurs, and removing trees and the importance of trees in the landscape for that biotic pump. I mean, we should all be asking, looking and asking and thinking about these other things.
Can I? Go for it.
As educators yourselves, are you aware of any programs that are being implemented in current schools or universities to change the way those that are still interested in agriculture come through for their farming practices as more of a regen approach?
I know that Southern Cross University has a Regen Ag course, which is really good. I know Josh Rappel has done it, so if you're interested in that, come chat to him.
So it's really interesting. Our daughter finished HSC, and in sitting with the the parent-teacher meetings, there was a lady, her agricultural student teacher was saying. So the answer to your question is yes, but I never realised until I heard of that it is happening. That I think it was the teacher was saying that the curriculum in agriculture for kids hadn't changed in 25 years. And the exams were still the same. So the easiest way for her to get her marks was to go back through past papers, because every single question in her paper was going to be in one of those papers. Kate Spry who's in Tamworth, is doing this in the education system on regenerative agriculture. And I know that Bryony Looker in Armidale, they have changed. They are changing the syllabus for agriculture in New South Wales schools.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I wonder if everyone can join me in thanking our amazing guest speakers today.